Thank you. Thank you. Glad to be here. Let me start out. We call it modern Vietnamese, and I always leery when people use the word authentic. As you know, food always continue changing. When I was growing up, it was only Vietnamese food in Vietnam, but now I think the last Christmas I was in Saigon, I was eating at a Moroccan restaurant with a colonial architecture backdrop, but it's in Saigon. So it goes to tell you globalization, sushi, Spanish tapas are in Saigon and continue. And as you know, those are going to continue affecting chef there and changing the cuisine. My background, I was born in Vietnam in the central region, about 8 miles north of Saigon. It's between Hue and Ho Chi Minh City, I should say. And we grew up sort of a mountain town, a lot of farming. Just back step a little bit, Vietnamese cuisine is really introduced, was dominated by the Chinese for a long time, so a lot of Chinese influence. You'll see a lot of the southern Chinese from the Canton region, especially a particular group called Chao Zhou, a separate group that influenced a lot of the street food of Vietnamese cooking, and also the French were there in the starting from the teens all the way to the 50s. You'll see things like Vietnamese baguette, essentially baguette that was introduced to Vietnam, and the Vietnamese had changed it. I sort of think of like Philly cheesesteak. You know, it's not, you can't just take a French baguette and make a Philly cheesesteak, because the Vietnamese sort of did the same thing. There's rice flour and different and wheat flour and sugar conditioning to make it softer. So you'll see the influence. My sort of view on calling modern cooking, Vietnamese cooking, is really just using the local ingredients, what I can find in the States and San Francisco, and keep the really what I remember as a kid eating this food and not really change it. And what I do is I edit and pick things that are that will work, or sometimes I think it will work, and I put it out on the menu, and if it sells, it sells. If it doesn't, we have a lot of surprises. We're serving this daikon rice cake, which is, I didn't think it was going to sell, and now I can't take it off the menu. So I thought what we're going to do today is I'm going to do a classic street food called bánh xèo. We call it crepe, but it's actually, it's a Vietnamese street food. So you got the Chinese influence, you got the French influence, and some of the high port, sort of like King's food in a way. But a lot of the food that I'm really interested in is really the street food that vendor had created that makes it really interesting and unique. And I constantly go back to Vietnam once a year and eat on the street food and learn about these food. And Vietnam's a long country. It takes about 2.5 hours to fly from one end to another. So you'll see the differences between northern food, central food, where Hue and Da Nang is. And Hue at one point was the capital, so you have a lot of sort of king's food that come from that region. Very interesting. Something like green banana and snail and pork belly braised in turmeric. And then the south, the weather changed greatly. The south, especially getting into the Mekong Delta with the tropical and the high heat. So, like for instance, this dish you're about to make is called the Vietnamese crepe, and in the central region it's much thicker. It's really almost like a tortilla thick, and in the south we try to get them really thin and crunchy. This dish is start with rice flour and tapioca starch and cornstarch, and the binding is coconut milk. And you see that on your table. It's got coconut milk and turmeric. There's no egg in it. And also, not only how you cook this, is how you eat this. And one thing with our restaurant is that often we have to teach customer how to eat this food. I remember we got a customer returning an imperial roll, a fry roll back, saying it's greasy. And we went to when the dish got back to the kitchen, I see all the condiment, the lettuce and the mint, it was all untouched. And I finally realized they didn't know how to eat this. If you just eat the roll straight, fried, it might seem greasy, but it's meant to be condiment. You meant to wrap all this lettuce and mint. And the Vietnamese treat herbs really important. I mean, for them, texture. I'm sure you all had the classic Vietnamese noodle soup pho, yeah? As you know, often they'll have a platter herb on the table. It's meant for you to take it one piece at a time and let the heat melt the herb and smell the aroma. In fact, some places in the South, they go to the extent of using a male beetle gland. In fact, some of these noodle houses, you can double the price of the noodle and using a beetle gland in 2 drops onto your soup. And you start getting a sensation of smelling pears and licorice and walnut. And that's the extent to talk about aromatic, how they just eat their soup. They're not just straight on not only flavor and texture. They'll take something like green cabbage, shave it really thin, soak it in water, or they'll do something like a water spinach and split that into 4s to curl up and get this texture for your soup so that you put this vegetable onto your soup. So often, you know, these street vendor, they won't share your recipe. And often I would just have to go back 2 or 3 times to eat the food so that I can get right down to texture and work on the different recipe to get the texture you need. Here we're going to start with some onion, some pork. The idea is just to get that cooked halfway. And in the market, you'll see these stands that have probably 8 or 9 charcoal grill in different heat level, and they just switch the pan around. And often you have to wait for them to eat one at a time because it takes a little while to cook. And often these vendors will share, like a noodle shop will be next door to serve this kind of, while they're waiting for their crepe, they can get a noodle. The Vietnamese name for this dish called bánh xèo, it means bun means bread, xèo is a sizzling sound of the batter hitting the pan. And often it was done on the wok so that you get a little bit more surface area to get more crunchy and spread the batter around. And the batter, you kind of have to mix it up as the flour settle. We like to have the flour soak overnight. And also, one of the ingredients in here is mung beans. Mung bean that's been soaked, then grinded. It will add to the texture of this crepe. So once high heat, get that going, and you want to put some bean sprout, half of it, where you would, and some shrimp on the other half, because you're going to churn the crepe over, and let that steam it up. And halfway through it, once the shrimp cooked, and you open up the lid and get the skin crispy. We have any questions so far?
Yeah, I want to know.
Say that again?
Is coconut milk traditional, or is water sometimes used to make the batter?
No, you gotta have coconut milk. Without the fat, you won't have the binding. It's very traditional coconut milk. often they have to make their milk themselves straight from older coconut. You have young coconut, which are sold on the street for like soda, but older coconut, you have to grind it. They have to use contraption where it's like a blade where they sat on the blade and they carve it and they shave it. Big part of our cuisine is in coconut.
What kind of oil do you use?
This is just canola. The heats are fairly high, and peanut oil. I wouldn't use too much olive oil because the heat will burn it up. So back to the mint, and in the West Coast, there's a lot more herb. Obviously, the farmers are closer. They're sawtooth and Vietnamese mint. That's another very popular one, rau rum, R-A-U-R-U-M, and that is something about 20 years ago. I don't remember seeing here. I think somebody must have smuggled it into the country. They grow them like weed, so but it's great flavor in salad, in soup. And also, what we have here is this classic dipping sauce. Fish sauce, sugar, vinegar, a little chili, sometimes garlic, but this is the basis of a lot of the Vietnamese cooking, is the fish sauce. And fish sauce is made from anchovy. So the steaming is done, and I'm going to try to turn this down a little bit. And sometimes you don't have enough oil, put a little oil on the edges and let it crisp it up. So the fish sauce in Vietnam, depending on which part of the country you come from, often is layer anchovy and rock salt. And it sits in these barrels for about 6 months, minimum 6 months. And they strain it and they get the first round plus the first press. They return those things back to the barrel for another 24 days or so to get the second press. And the second press, they mix the two together. And some of the cheaper brands, the way to tell good fish sauce, number one, by looking at the color. They actually do oxidize. I don't recommend after a fish sauce open for 2 months, you should use that. And it's only like $2.50. You're risking your life for $2.50, yeah. So it needs to get a little crispy some more. So what happened is the fish sauce, the judge how good the fish sauce is the depth of flavor and less salt. And you'll see some of the much darker ones, they're really used for marinade. They're not worth buying. They come from, fish sauce are made all over Southeast Asia, from Thailand, Cambodia, Laos, you name it. In fact, actually, in Chow Zhou cooking in China, there's fish sauce. So fish sauce stretch, people always think of Southeast Asia, but Southern Chinese do use fish sauce. And you should taste it. And they adjust it with, those are the three bases, some sort of citric vinegar or lime. Then you balance it with sugar and water. And in some cases, they don't put any chili at all, straight out. Then you will adjust the spiciness based on your liking. Anyway, I mean, you guys could start trying to cook some of this while I was talking, if you like. Oh well. Slow burn on this one. I know it's always hard to talk and cook at the same time. Yes.
You said you should judge the fish sauce by its color. What
Yeah.
color should it be?
It should be more like iced tea. Like this is a pretty decent color right there. But iced tea would be a good judge for color.
What is the mung bean, ground mung bean?
Mung bean, the crispiness, and in Vietnam, they have issue with sticking to the pan. Also, here you got non-stick, a little less of an issue. But I should make a new one. I know it's always trouble like trying to talk and cook at the same time. I can't seem to do both at the same time.
Can you talk about mung beans a little bit?
Mung bean is, if they're the original form, it's sort of green, but you can buy them already peeled in half, which looks like, how should I say, like yellow. We lost our shipment, so we cook all our sample. And like glass noodle or cellophane noodle, those are also made from mung bean.
Are they always ground?
Say it again.
Are they always ground?
You have to soak it before you ground it. And we find that by leaving the batter overnight, it does help with the crispiness. Also, again, if you do in a wok, getting it off the pan, it also makes it a little easier. Often, my approach to all this is that I know a lot of folks want to change it, add different things to it, but I think it's really crucial that you understand the purpose of the dish. This dish is really about the batter. It's about the crunchiness. If you don't eat pork, you don't eat shrimp, you can take those things out. But whatever you add in there, you don't want to make it a really, let's say, a wet eggplant, for instance, that might affect the crunchiness of the skin. So if you're going to replace them something, let's say you do a vegetarian version of this, mindful, that's how I approach all my cooking of converting food for today's need. Let's say you can't serve pork or you can't serve meat or shellfish. Again, back to what I do with introducing Vietnamese cuisine to the general public is I really not try to change it too much. I really try to go back and do it like what I remember serving as a kid where I grew up. If I go to a new town, I often will eat 5 or 6 stands to make sure they're all the same. Sometimes one stand might do something different, so you can't resist relying on one guy.